I pass the podium to Arturo Franco. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Diana, for your kind introduction, and Carlos, Chris, it's a pleasure to share this panel with you, and thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be here this morning. In many ways, I consider myself to be an outsider, insider of Mexico. Outside because I've spent 3 of the last 10 years living outside the country. And this has allowed me to experience it from a distance, through the looking glass of the international community, in a way. So from my time in Switzerland, working with the global leaders from all sectors, and also during my years in academia in Boston, I've been able to have the opportunity to work on Mexico rather than from Mexico, and this gives one a very valuable perspective. Yet I'm also myself a product of the economic and political transformations of Mexico in the last 3 decades. I've lived through 3 economic crises, 2 recessions. I've seen my country suffer through transformation and change. And I've seen my grandfather, for example, lose his orange farm to competition from NAFTA. But I've also benefited in the last 3 decades. I'm part of a new generation of Mexicans who speaks English and travels, who competes globally. I'm part of a generation who grew up with openness and trade and more freedom and more democracy than ever before in Mexico. So my presence here today, as it could be the case of Carlos and many of you, is evidence, it's testament that in Mexico, social mobility and opportunity do exist. However, is it enough? Is it available to everyone? And as the title of the book, which cannot be shared, suggests, it's called Mexico Moving Forward from Nostalgia to Global Competition. Is it really moving forward? Are we really looking at a prosperous future of global competitiveness, or is it caught up in this nostalgia of the past? During the decades of the 60s and the 70s, Mexico had average growth rates of 7%. More recently, Mexico has settled for growth rates of 2%. In fact, if you take the 2 last presidential administrations, the growth per capita of the country has been dangerously close to 0. Why? Well, basically because productivity has stagnated. Total factor productivity, GDP per work hour, has remained very close to the levels of 1980, the year that I was born. Since South Korea had a GDP per capita of $4,000 US in 1980, Mexico had $5,000 US. Today, South Koreans earn, on average, $30,000, while Mexicans earn less than half. Many people in Mexico don't like this kind of comparison. They think it's unfair. They think that we'd rather be comparing ourselves with Argentina or Brazil. I personally don't believe that South Korea had any advantage over Mexico's geographic position, resource endowment, or access to markets in the last 20 years. Neither did the other countries in the graph that beat Mexico in growth. You see, Mexico in 1992 was one of the first, or the first country accepted into the OECD that was non-developed. Because of that reason, when the first BRICS paper was written by Goldman Sachs later on, both Mexico and South Korea were deemed too developed to become part of the now famous acronym, while Brazil was, of course, the country of the eternal future that never came to be. But okay, if you want to compare Mexico with Brazil, we can do it as well. Maybe not on growth, and definitely not on soccer. Let's compare Mexico and Brazil on poverty alleviation. During the last decade, Brazil has been able to reduce 50% of its poverty rate, while Mexico has both poverty and extreme poverty rates that are very similar to the ones that it had at the end of the last decade. And by the way, Brazil beat Mexico in growth during the last decade. So for me, nostalgia is constantly looking for easier countries to compare ourselves with, instead of learning from those that have shown success. Now, why has Mexico underperformed economically? During the last few months, I've analyzed more than 30 studies that were written between 2008 and 2012 that touch upon this growth puzzle that Mexico is facing. The good news is that they all agree that Mexico has solid economic fundamentals, fiscal and monetary policy have been appropriate, and that, as Chris will probably touch upon, investment and trade prospects are very positive in the future, including with the United States. They all agree that Mexico can grow much, much more. The bad news, however, is that there are more than 50 single factors or explanations why Mexico hasn't grown. 50. I have tried to arrange them in a way that people can analyze them, but really, is it the business environment? Is it the rule of law? Is it underinvestment in human capital? Is it the monopolies and the oligopolies that we all know about? Is it NAFTA and the diminishing returns to trade? Or is it China, competition in the U.S., or China in Mexico? The reality is, it's a little bit of everything. And many people in Mexico feel that with the so-called structural reforms that we've been talking about for decades, all of these problems will disappear. So let's look at what's happened with reform in Mexico. In 1997, the year that a single party lost absolute majority in Congress forever, the rate of approval of initiatives of law from the executive and the percentage of laws that come from the president have had a massive reduction. To me, this is called political power transfer from the presidency into Congress. At the same time, if you look at the graph on the right, we'll see that there has been a huge drop in the number of constitutional reforms that Mexico has approved. There was a little rebound with the Calderón sexenio, but the economic reforms have been held hostage during the past 15 years in Congress. I'm speaking about the energy reform. I'm speaking about a comprehensive fiscal reform. I'm speaking about an overhaul of the competition laws, about the 30-year-old labor law that Mexico has. All of these reforms have fallen ill to the same predicament, which is called paralysis. Reform paralysis and political gridlock in Mexico. And to me, nostalgia again is thinking that we can go to a past where political competition and democracy will not get in the way of reform, when reform just happens, when it gets mandated. And that is what many Mexicans are thinking it should be the way forward. Right? So now let's talk about what we're all here to talk about, which is the election. Every 6 years, Mexicans change their favorite pastime, which is watching soap operas, to watching polls, which is pretty much the same. Now, there's a last thing I want to say, which is how you can look at the election from a regional perspective. This came out in El Norte. This is the two Mexicos, the Mexico of the North, where Peña Nieto is winning in most of the states. So his averages are 39 in the north and 42 in the Bajío. And the south of López Obrador, where he is winning. This to me makes it an election between two candidates. Of course, Josefina with the useful vote could get votes here and there. And she's, we have to say this, the first woman with real possibilities to be the president of Mexico. So we have to respect that. But to me, this is very simple. It translates almost perfectly to the poverty rate of the country. Mexico is two Mexicos at least. Well, it's actually four Mexicos. Two Mexicos, a Mexico of the north with higher income and development than the Mexico of the south. But also these two Mexicos of the Mexico that looks backward and the Mexico that looks forward, or the other way around. So who's going to win on Sunday? So as Diana said, I just flew in from Monterrey. Unfortunately, my magic crystal ball was confiscated in the customs. They said it was flammable. So I'm going to have to leave you to this. Whoever wins, let's hope that it's not because of this nostalgia, of this feeling that we were better when we were worse, of this anti-democratic sentiment that is reflected in the Latino Barometro polls that says people are willing to give up political freedom for economic development. Let's hope that it's a Mexico of global competitiveness, of our generation, and of the future. Thank you.